Welcome, everyone, to our second Shine Spotlight of Shine Connect. Now, some of you might have wanted to join us to see Jamil give his talk about having a stem cell transplant. Unfortunately, Jamil is not very well, which is one of the hazards of having a stem cell transplant. And so we are really lucky, though, that we are joined by the lovely Hannah. And Hannah is one of our facilitators and one of our volunteers as well. She's bit of a jack of all trades around Shine parts. But Hannah is going to, that's Shine and Hannah combined. Yeah, I have Shanna. Hannah is going to be with us this afternoon for this session, and she is going to tell us a bit about her story of being diagnosed with Hodgkin lymphoma, as well as relapsing from that and having a stem cell transplant. And we'll have some time for questions afterwards. If anyone has any questions, I'm sure I'll have some questions. But Hannah, I'm going to hand over to you now. I know Hannah's got a few slides, and then we will we'll open it up to conversation.
Thank you very much. I shall just screen share, so just bear with me 1 second. Hopefully you can all see that. My screen's a little bit of a dance around, so love a good old Zoom move around on the screen. So hi, I'm Hannah. Lovely to see you all today, and this is my story. So that's me on the left with the love glasses, and my mate on the right, who was a bride, actually was a bridesmaid for the same year I got diagnosed, so all will become clear. So life before cancer. So I was diagnosed back in 2014. But I'll take you back to 2013, which is kind of when I started to see things changing a little bit for me. So just in case you can't remember, way back to 2013, it was the year of the Scottish referendum. It was also the year that I lowered my golf handicap to 13, which if you're not a golfer is quite a hard thing to do. The year I was 33 and that everybody around me was either getting married or having kids. It was the year I felt like I was becoming a hypochondriac. I had so many visits to the GP, but nothing was explained, but I had headaches. I just felt knackered all the time, and I just kept getting ill, basically. It was also the year I developed a stiff neck and had a bit of a swelling, which moved around up and down. It was in my neck, just moved around. I think if it had been a lump, maybe somewhere else as a female, maybe in the breast, perhaps I'd considered that a bit more problematic, but I only ever thought of it as a swelling. The year I took an occasional disliking to wine. I mean, who goes to the GP and says, sorry, there must be something wrong with me, I don't like wine. And the year I lost a lot, but gained a lot as well. So what happened after that? So on the 21st of July 2014, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. And actually, I only went to see somebody at a hospital because my nurse specialist at work actually suggested that's what I should do. I think she suspected that's what it was. But if it wasn't for her, then perhaps I might not have got a diagnosis quite so quickly. I learned how to inject hormones and that bone marrow extraction is never to be repeated, and that PET scans, despite the communication that you get sent out to you, are not relaxing. Chemo 1 for me commenced in August 2014 as an inpatient, and that was due to there being concerns in regards to the location of the mass around my heart area, and it continued bi-weekly for 6 months. I checked in with PJs and bridesmaid shoes. I had bulky disease in my neck and chest, and there was concerns regarding secondary disease, hence the speed from diagnosis to actual first treatment. This chemo lark was not too bad, and we settled into a routine every other week with a parental watcher. So I felt like I'd become a teenager again, because every time I went to hospital, a parent came with me. In 3 weeks, I'd gone from the security of a good job, living life to the full, to having cancer and wondering what that actually meant in reality, and back sort of staying with the parents. Don't get me wrong, I do love them dearly, but living with them day in, day out is quite challenging. Here one day, gone the next. The side effects, I managed to tick many off that list, which was fairly extensive. And that chemo is not the ideal Christmas Eve present, and actually can cause family arguments if you're not allowed to go to the pub. So in February 2015, I went back to the hospital following some scans to identify, hopefully, that this cancer lark had done. But actually, it was the day that my world bombed out for the second time in less than 12 months. They'd found a shadow on my chest area, and it was really inconclusive. The options, there were so many options, and there was certainly no certainty that day. And I think I was probably still on point 1 of the conversation when they'd actually moved on to point 27. My mum was scurrying notes in a notebook, and I'm not even sure what my dad was doing at that point. I met a lot of consultants and professors in a very short period of time, all trying to identify if the mass that they could see in my chest area was something new or actually was existing growth that had actually not responded to the 6 months of chemotherapy that I just had. I held it together just about, as those around me were doing less than an impressive job. And I don't know, it was tough days, long sleepless nights, and lots of very unanswered questions that perhaps none of us ever really put on any kind of life plan. It really felt like it was the gift that continues. I raised the question of my fertility right back in the beginning. I'd mentioned this, but I was told that I didn't have enough time to do fertility. So this time I made the decision to delay treatment by 3 months and have a go at egg harvesting. That's not something that is an easy thing to do, and I'm quite happy to talk about that further on as we go through the presentation. But unfortunately for me, despite injecting hormones, that was an epic fail. We quickly moved on from egg harvesting to my second form of treatment, which was called ESHAP. And that was an advanced inpatient chemotherapy delivered over 5 days as an inpatient over 3 cycles. So I was in for 5 days, home for a week, in for 5 days, home for a week, and in for 5 days and home for a week. It was intense, it was hard going. And actually that was my first experience of actually being a patient on an open ward, whereas previously I'd always been a patient in an enclosed room, and you start to realise that being a patient on an open ward has some more significant challenges than perhaps being in a private room. I was totally unprepared for being an inpatient on a cancer ward. I was very naive, and I hadn't considered what you can actually see or experience as part of that. ESHAP would be followed, I knew this before going into hospital, by either an allo or an auto stem cell transplant. For those not in the know, one of those is using your own cells and the other one is using a donor cell. The conversations leading up to a stem cell transplant are extremely scary. You talk about stats of 1 in 3 maybe coming out the other side. You talk about graft versus host, you talk about rejection, you talk about looking for donors, and actually, you know, if you've not got somebody on the register, your options are very limited. So some really tough conversations went on in a very, very short period of time. Not only that, but you're also still trying to get your head around the fact that you've had 6 months treatment, and despite being told it was a good cancer, let's face it, none of these cancers are good, but that's what I was told. You know, quite frankly, it wasn't looking like it was a particularly good cancer for me. So on the 15th of July, I was admitted to have a stem cell transplant, and that was because actually, fortunately, I'd responded to the ESHAP treatment. If I'd not responded to the ESHAP treatment, then actually it would have required some further treatment. But I was fortunate, I did respond to ESHAP, and they believed that I got to full remission. And however, knew that if I stayed in that position, that the lymphoma would come back at some point. So the stem cell transplant was actually to ensure that remission could be continued for myself. So I moved in on the 15th of July, and I was an inpatient for approximately 5.5 weeks. So on the screen, you've got some little blue tablets, which was the starter for my stem cell transplant. And the lady holding up a white tub at the bottom, those are actually my pesky stem cells that were frozen. So pre going in for the stem cell transplant, I was injecting myself to stimulate my blood growth and bone marrow. And actually, we did manage to get a really good concentration of stem cells, and they're in that freezer. I left hospital in August. I went home and recovered. I could hardly walk, I could hardly move. And quite frankly, the 6 weeks I was in hospital, for quite a large proportion of that, I wasn't probably fully aware of what was going on. It was even an achievement to get dressed some days. 26th of October 2015 was when I went in for my scan results, and I was told that I was all clear. I did never get to ring the bell though. I've always kind of felt a little bit like peeved by that, like hear about these people that have the cancer bell, but I've never had that experience. I was all clear. I was in shock from everything that I'd gone through. And people kept asking me, when are you going back to work? Because you look so well. And I went back to work in the January of 2016. It was way too soon. But everybody kept saying to me, you should be going back to work, you should be considering this. And I think social activities of meeting friends for coffee or meeting up with, doing a bit of voluntary work, because I was working in a charity shop just to kind of get me out of the house. The stark difference between doing that and actually going back to work were tremendous. I returned to work very gradually. I was very fortunate. They did it over a 6-month phased return, but I did actually go back on 2 hours a day, twice a week, and we built up slowly to 20 hours. And then I stayed there for a little while before I went back full time. In January 2017, I got asked to work on a SAP IT project on a global scale for the company that I was working for. And I was working crazy hours. I was in the office probably about 18 hours a day. And by July, I wasn't feeling too clever. And I kind of put that down to the fact that I was working ludicrous hours. But I developed this stiff neck on the left-hand side again. And so was scanned, and my worst fears were confirmed. The lymphoma was still present in my chest. So effectively, I had relapsed, and we were back where we started, more chemo, talks of a second stem cell transplant and radiotherapy. And I know some people that have got Hodgkin's lymphoma, this might be a bit scary to hear, but actually, unfortunately, it would appear that the initial treatment had perhaps not worked quite as well. So when we moved into stem cell transplant, actually, I probably should have had a donor stem cell transplant at that point, not my own cells. But since then, I have got to remission as a result of having radiotherapy. I declined the option of a second stem cell transplant on the advice and guidance of my consultant. I felt that we were worth trying radiation and an immunotherapy to see what kind of impact that would have, so that if the worst thing was to happen again, I've kind of got the stem cell transplant to fall back on as a last resort. And I feel that that was the right decision for me. That wasn't without its challenges in terms of me coming to that decision, but actually for me, it was the right thing to do. So what is the impact of cancer? I've got a different body with increased weight. I never got the skinny cancer cells. I was really hoping that I might have lost a bit of weight, but actually in reality, I've gained 5 stone. I've now got joint pain and nerve damage in a variety of places of my body because I've had so much chemotherapy, which does cause me challenges on a day-to-day basis. Fatigue, that's probably slightly improved now. I mean, I'm a good few years on, but it does still kind of like catch up with me when I kind of ignore the signs that we shouldn't probably do quite as much as we do, but we kind of think we're in our early 40s, should be able to do these things. I've got early menopause, and that's been a tremendous problem for me and is still an ongoing problem. I'm now infertile. There's been a huge financial loss. I mean, I didn't work for nearly 4 years, and I got made redundant at the second time I came to go back to work because they'd restructured the business that I was working with. I'm now self-employed, but with that comes some uncertainty as well. But for me, it's the right decision. I've been abandoned by some friends, ones that I felt were really close. I mentioned earlier that I checked in with a pair of bridesmaid shoes, but unfortunately, me and the bride are no longer in communication. I guess we've taken different paths in life. I've got an awesome Shine community. I found Shine in 2018 as a result of being a participant on the Great Escape. And for me, that really answered some of the questions I never knew I'd actually got, but actually kind of made you realise that some of the thoughts, feelings, and things I was thinking were actually normal if you've been through cancer. Who'd have thought it? I guess there's a loss of me, but an appreciation and compassion for me is important. And it's taken me a long time to get to that point. But actually, some days I kind of do marvel at how incredible my body is because it's been through so much. I still spend an awful lot of time at hospital. I've got a part-time job, as I regularly crack on to my mother when she sat next to me, that we need a more original family day out, and I definitely need a second part-time job that doesn't involve hospital. But I guess that's part of life for me. I think a lot of people think now you get to remission or you get to the end of your treatment and that actually that's the end. Well, we all know different, don't we? The isolation and loneliness is real, and that can come in peaks and waves. And it's not really surprising because actually, if you can't talk to people about what you're really thinking or what you're really feeling, with people that actually really get it, then actually that is lonely. Dating after cancer is a nightmare. When do you bring up the fact you've had cancer? Do you bring it up at the beginning because you want to be honest? How do you mention the fact that you can't have children on a date? I mean, let alone are you going to talk about marriage or dating children on a first date? But when do you bring that up? Because do you waste time? Don't you waste time? And that your bills still need paying. So when you've got no salary, that makes that quite difficult. And quite frankly, whilst there is the benefit system out there, not possibly all it should be cracked up to be. So what does my future look like? I'm now self-employed, working with some brilliant people. I've got an appreciation for the small things, sunsets, trees, the Shine community, dogs. I think the things that perhaps we perhaps missed before, I now have a better appreciation for. how easy things can change. And COVID was a massive reminder for that. You can kind of get back on the treadmill of life, can't you? But actually it can change again overnight. That a fear of relapse is really real. Every time you kind of get some form of illness, the doctors can kind of overreact, or you can overreact, and that can actually be quite triggering for you. That there really are some stupid people out there. I'll give you an example. My HR boss got asked by the cleaners at work whether this cancer lark was catching, because 2 of us got diagnosed, unfortunately, at my place of work, and they wanted to know what the business was going to do about it to prevent them from catching cancer. That happy is my new mantra. So I check myself in with happy. I don't sit here chanting happy at myself, but if I'm struggling, or I kind of get myself in a bit of a tiz, or I'm feeling anxious, I have to question why I'm doing something. And if it's not making me happy, then actually should I be doing it? I mean, the ironing's never going to make me happy. But unfortunately, sometimes we still have to do ironing. In fact, even Kynwyn managed to get me to do some ironing at the weekend. There is life after cancer, but the cancer bit stays with you, as there are too many reminders. So even if you kind of look well, you go on holiday insurance is still a nightmare, isn't it? Or, you still have treatment checkups. Your body might be different. We all have our own unique reminders, but actually they can cause anxiety amongst us all. And that in the darkest of days, laughter and understanding are very important.
Thank you, Hannah. That was great, and all the better because you've just stepped in to do this. So thank you. For those of you who are joining us later, or came in a little bit late, the reason we've got Hannah here is that Jamil is unwell. So we thought, who else do we know who's had blood cancer and a stem cell transplant? And Hannah was the lucky winner of that conversation. So she really, we're very thankful to her for stepping in. But thank you for that, Hannah. And I mean, I've known you for a long time, so I knew some of it, but actually it's always a good reminder, when you see it, I think, written out on paper, how many things it is and how long it's gone on for as well.
And it's easy to forget that, right, isn't it? Because actually you kind of get on the treadmill, don't you? And some days when you're having a tough day, actually I now think, blimey, I've been at this gig now for 9 years, and it still causes a massive problem for me on a day-to-day, not a day-to-day basis, but a weekly basis. And actually that's a long time to kind of be living with something that, quite frankly, nobody chooses to have.
Yeah. And that was actually one of the things I wanted to ask you, because you said on your slide, there is no, or you were really struck when you were diagnosed by the fact there was no certainty. And how did you kind of negotiate living with the uncertainty at the time that you were going through the treatment? And then is that different now, or have you learned things that you're still using?
Absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, I got my diagnosis in a work environment. So I actually took it in an open office, which in hindsight was probably the most stupid thing I could have ever have done. And it's quite amazing how quickly an office empties when you start talking about cancer and time out of work. But the gentleman that called me told me I got a kind cancer. He told me that
kind cancer.
Yeah,
I haven't heard that before.
Yeah, it's if you're going to have a cancer, it's a kind one because it's not as aggressive. And recovery is generally quite quick. So it's probably a small blip in your life for 6 months, and then you can go back to normal. There's that word that we all hate. And so naively, I wasn't forced, but I was advised strongly not to work during that period. So I chose not to, and I did listen to the advice. But I naively went into that initially thinking, okay, 6 months treatment, I'll just temporarily put everything on hold, and then I'll just pick my life up as it was before. And so I guess my focus was, I need to get back to work, I need to get back to work, I need to get back to work, because I guess that's where my drive and motivation had been. And the reality is that went on, instead of 6 months, actually for about 20 months before I went back to work. And then you suddenly arrive back at work thinking, oh, well, it'd be like it was before. And it's not at all. And it's not just a work thing. You're not the same. Your body doesn't look the same. It doesn't do what it did before. It doesn't think the same way. You get confused and you've got all this stuff going on in your brain that you can't lose. I think for me, how do I cope, which is a question you asked me. I think then I probably tried a bit of denial. As in, like, you know what, we're just going to keep putting one foot in front of the other and let's hope that this bullshit disappears, because quite frankly, that was probably what I thought was going to happen. And I kept on at that route. I did do counselling. I didn't find it awfully helpful back then. But I think time is a great healer as well. And with that, you learn from the things you do well and perhaps the stupid things that you do. And also, I think I've learned to be kind to myself, which wasn't probably a default position. But actually, we put extra pressure on ourselves that we shouldn't do. And I think, you know, if you look at the programs we deliver, we say, you know, you should talk to yourself like you talk to other people. And actually, if we do talk to ourselves like we talk to our friends or other people experiencing what we do, then actually we probably generally would be a lot kinder to ourselves, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, just to think back at your work, because obviously you're working, well, you were at work when you were diagnosed, and then you went back to work and it felt different. And I mean, can you say a little bit more about that? Maybe how it felt different, or was there anything that you particularly struggled with or just found really had changed?
So I went back and somebody else was working in my job, which was the first thing, which was a bit weird. So I had to kind of like buddy up with them. So that was a bit like, oh, you're doing my job, so what do I do? And it was because it was a phased return, which was fine. It was familiar surroundings, but like all the conversations had moved on by 20 months, which is what they should have done. But the environment looked the same, but it felt like being the new girl in familiar surroundings, kind of knowing how to access things, but actually not really knowing what the hell had gone on for 20 months. But then people also forgot that you'd not been there for 20 months when you were having conversations and you were kind of asking them to bring you up to speed. And also, it came from a good place, but some people wanted to know how I felt or how I was doing. But that could be a little bit triggering as well. And then you'd got the people that were probably asking you if you were okay, that were probably doing it for their own self-good because they felt they should, but didn't really want to. So if you overshared or gave them something they perhaps didn't want to hear, they got out of there pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So I learned to come up with a few sentences that work for me, just to kind of either say, yeah, this is what's going on, or yeah, not too bad, thanks. Because actually sometimes it's just easier just to say that.
Yeah. And you went back on a phased return, but how was your energy after kind of 20 months of treatment?
So they told me I was going to start on 2 hours a day, and I laughed. I thought it was ridiculous. I thought it was the most stupid idea they'd ever come up with. I did commute though for an hour and a bit each day. So effectively I was out of the house for about 5 hours. So even for 2 hours work, but your benefits stop when you kind of get over a certain number of hours, because I had quite a good job. So actually I'd gone into negative equity in terms of it was costing me more to go to work than I was actually getting paid. So that was a bit of a problem. But actually I got to 20 hours and I couldn't go any beyond that. I was knackered all of the time, and it felt like you were getting up, going to work, sleeping, get up, going to work, sleeping. And so actually it's kind of like eat, sleep, repeat. And actually you don't then get the good energy, do you? And I didn't know that at the time, but you don't get the good energy that kind of fills you up and kind of makes you happy and has kind of the bits within you that kind of make you perform as a human. So actually the 20 hours was the right route for me to go down. But if somebody had said that to me before I'd gone back to work, I'd have laughed. But also financially, right? You know, there's implications of any working part-time. I mean, they were very good with me initially, but I was off for such a long period of time that, you know, full pay can't continue forever, can it?
Yeah. And I think the phased return is interesting just because we know loads of people at Shine who, you know, often what you get told when you ask your doctor, when should I go back to work? They say, well, go back when you're ready. And you know, it's really hard to know when you're ready, and it's hard to know whether you are ready to go back full time, because actually it's physically and mentally really draining after you've had that time out doing something completely different. So your life has completely changed. You go back, you're a very different person, even if you don't want to be. You know, a lot of things will change for you. And then you've got the expectations around work and guilt and, you know, not living up to what you were doing before. It can be a really difficult time, I think. And absolutely. I think we underestimate that.
I think that I joined a few support groups for lymphoma action locally, and that was before I'd found Shine. But I couldn't understand why I didn't see any young people. Now, one, there aren't that many young people diagnosed, so that's more tricky in the first place. And I had this will to try and keep that going once I went back to work, but there's only so many plates you can spin. And actually you suddenly realize that actually that is one of the first things to probably go, because if you've got a family or you've got commitments and you've got a job, you've got to earn money to pay your bills, so actually you can't then be there to maybe support other people. So it can be a really lonely experience, because actually trying to find other people that really relate, because it's very different to maternity leave. I know it gets likened to that, but I think that's probably the most similar experience. Not that I've had children, but you know, it's difficult, and it's again, it can be very lonely, and there isn't really that compassion or understanding what you're at the hospital. Again, people can see you look physically okay, so you must be fine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You look so well.
Yeah.
So I did want to ask, I mean, I know you talked a little bit about doing some fertility treatment at a point in your overall treatment. Could you say a little bit more about that? What you did and what happened?
So I was diagnosed in July 2014. And at that point, I did actually ask about my fertility, because obviously, well, I was single. I hadn't had any children at that point. And my knowledge of chemotherapy was quite limited, but I kind of knew that, you know, children, chemo, probably not a great concept together. And I wasn't sidetracked on it, but I was basically told I didn't really have time to worry about such things because of where the mass for me was. They were concerned about secondaries and attachment to the heart and lungs. So, and I was also told that the first lot of treatment I was having was actually fairly kind, so that people generally recovered from it. And after 12 months, probably could have children. I did talk to a friend of mine about it, see what her thoughts were. And she was like, well, there's no point you having children if you're not here. So I was like, well, that's quite a valid point. So I kind of proceeded. And I guess I had so much other stuff going on at that point. You kind of just have to get on with it and think you'll have to deal with the fallout of other stuff further down the line. But when I found out that the treatment hadn't worked before we went into the second line of treatment for ESHAP, I brought my fertility up again and asked, in terms of, if I have this lots of treatment and then this stem cell transplant, actually what risks does that pose to my fertility? And was told that at the end of the stem cell transplant, I'd be completely infertile. So I was told that I'd have the gear, but nothing to kind of use in the gear, if that makes sense. So effectively I could use donor eggs, but I'd have the womb, but nothing that I could generate myself. So I got offered the opportunity in Manchester to go and actually see a proper fertility specialist at St Mary's Hospital, Dr. Cheryl, actually, that's done quite a bit of work with us. And she talked through the options with me, and I decided to do a bit of egg harvesting. So the idea would be that I would try and stimulate some growth of eggs so that we could freeze them for me to do something with them further down the line. But the minimum gap that they're prepared to do any kind of egg harvesting on between chemotherapy is 3 months. So I actually took 3 months out of treatment, and that was a conscious decision to do that, but just to see whether we could actually stimulate any egg harvesting. So I had to inject hormones to try and stimulate egg harvesting, and that involved daily trips to and from Manchester, which is about an hour away from where I live. To stimulate the egg harvesting, you go through lots of treatment in a fertility clinic with lots of couples that sit there, also going through fertility. I was probably the only one sat there on my own, and I was most definitely the only one that was bald from a female perspective. But I mean, I also acknowledge that people that are going through fertility treatment themselves are also struggling as well. So it's not an easy journey if you've not got this cancer lark attached to it. But unfortunately for me, it was an epic fail. We didn't manage to stimulate any eggs that could actually be extracted. I do remember getting lectured by this consultant as I was lying on a bench, actually, and he'd not seen his toes for quite a long time, about excessive weight. And I'm looking at him thinking, well, it's all right, you talking to me about excessive weight, but you've not seen your toes for a while. And I kind of nearly said that to him. And I also nearly sort of wanted to say to him, have you actually tried chemotherapy? You know, like, I've gained weight. Don't believe the adverts that you see for some of these charities that go, you know, overweight causes cancer. They forget to tell you that cancer can also cause overweight. And so I kind of got a little bit angry at that point. But yeah, as soon as I found out it not worked, I got more or less transported into a counselling session. I was like, I can't deal with this today. Like, I just need to get out of here. Because actually I knew as soon as that had come to an end, actually I was starting my next lot of chemotherapy. But I guess for me it was a fail, but I guess I don't have those unanswered questions now, in terms of I tried it and okay, it didn't work out, but at least I haven't got that what may if maybe kind of thing in the back of your head, which is, should I have given that a go? But since being all clear, I've been back to the fertility centre, but funding is a nightmare. Like, and also when you're single, your options are less. I don't quite know how that can be possible. But if you're in a couple, you've got better options available to you than you have if you just turn up on your own, which seems quite unfair. But that was also location based as well. So I have the option still to use donor eggs, I guess. But the question I've now got is, can my body cope with that, because it's been through so much, and I also still have an awful lot of challenges post-treatment. So it's not necessarily cancer, but it's damage that the cancer's caused or the treatment's caused. So I'm fairly sort of at peace with it. I guess in the back of my head I kind of still hope a little bit sometimes, but the reality is I'm 42 now, and I don't know, it's the older side of having children, and I guess other people can probably relate to this. Other people go, well, there's options like adoption or fostering, and I'm not saying that they're not ideal options, but they're certainly very different to having your own child and carrying on your family's heritage. And I do feel a bit guilty in terms of my parents, because they haven't got any grandchildren. I kind of like I've ended the family line in a way, and I know they wouldn't see it like that, but I guess those are thoughts that we do put on ourselves, and that's quite sad. And then so it's tough, and you can't escape, can you, children, because they're everywhere, and I wouldn't want that to be the case. But I find days like first day of school a bit triggering sometimes, because everybody posts it on Facebook, and the ones that I really find difficult are the ones that don't appreciate children that have them, that probably shouldn't have them. But I'm sure we all have our own views on that one.
But I think it's hard as well, that age. And this is something that I really think older cancer patients don't have to experience, is they've maybe had children or decided not to have children, or it didn't happen, but they've had a long time to live with it. Whereas for people in Shine's age group, you're really at the age where people are getting married and having children, and it can feel like everybody around you is having children apart from you. And that can be really devastating, I think. And it's another loss that we have to experience through cancer, which when you read somebody's had cancer, you don't get to see all of the things around them that they've had to deal with as a result of that one diagnosis.
Absolutely. And even if you've got children, doesn't mean you didn't want any more children. And I think sometimes there's the assumption, isn't there, that, oh, you've got children, so you've finished your family. But that's not always true. And I think in society, people think they can just ask you whatever they like. So
yes, they really do.
No. Oh, have you got children? No. Oh, did you not want children?
Yeah.
No, I just go, no, sorry, I've had cancer, so it means I can't have them, and it generally shocks them. I mean, it's taken me a few years to get to that point, but I kind of think if people want to ask questions, then they should be prepared for an answer they get. I mean, I do it in quite a nice way, but actually, why should I say, well, no, I didn't want them? Because actually I did want them, but actually, unfortunately, I've had cancer, so I can't have them. And generally, they kind of like move on pretty quick. Some people will ask you then a bit more information, but I kind of feel like at least I'm being honest and true to myself then by saying that. And some people will feel more comfortable about doing that than others. I guess 9 years on, you become a bit more cocky with it, in a way, because I kind of think, well, if you're going to ask me stupid questions, you're going to get a real answer. So,
absolutely. I mean, I'm seeing some nods as well. So definitely, I think it's that nosiness, isn't it? And then, I mean, I've had people where I've said, well, I had cancer, so this is why this is happening. And then they've started to cry. And I think, oh my God, I don't want to have to deal. I don't know you. You've asked a nosy question and now you're crying. I don't need this. So,
there's a lady actually I've met through Shine, and I know she won't mind me sharing this, but through one of the programs actually. And sorry, my phone's just gone. I did not understand that in the background, which is really random. So one of the ladies I met through Shine, she was challenged quite frequently about her fertility, and she's like, well, basically you're just asking me when I last had sex. So she said, are you going to answer that question for me? And she said most people generally just walk off in a different direction. It's a great way of ending the topic. So I was like, yeah, I quite like that actually sometimes.
Right. So if people get nothing else from this conversation, those are two tips. One, tell them you've had cancer, or ask them when they last had sex. Then I'll shut them up. There you go.
They'll run off in the direction. Certainly probably won't ask that question of somebody else, will they?
Just kind of switching gears, one of the other things that you touched on in your presentation, which I think a lot of people, I know a lot of people will relate to, is the sense that, you know, friendships maybe changed or moved on, or friends changed. You might have lost friends. I mean, you said you felt abandoned by some of your friends. Did that come at a specific time in your treatment? Did it come afterwards, or was there a time that you particularly noticed that happening?
Came quite early on, really, to be honest. I think people got a bit bored, but also, like, I guess most of my friends in your early 30s, I guess you either got your family, haven't you, or you're out living, enjoying life. So those people carried on doing what they were doing. But because I wasn't doing what I used to do, which was go to work and go out and have fun and do all the social stuff, you quickly get left behind, and they stop asking questions. But a few of them asked some really stupid questions about, like, whether you've eaten the right kind of foods, or I had one person that removed a hat off my head, for example, on the first time I went out. And so you start to see people in a different light, shall we say? But I think also I'd always been, you know, when we've gone on nights out, I'd probably always been the one to make sure people got home all right, or I was always the one that kind of put people back together if they fell out and argued. And I think because I went out very rare and infrequently, I stopped actually accepting the bullshit, as I call it, and started saying, you know what, this is not acceptable. You know, your behaviour is childish. So maybe also I saw things for what they were. So I removed myself from situations, but I did feel abandoned, and I did get very, very upset by that. And then it took me a long time to get to that point, but I realised actually by focusing on the ones I'd lost, I actually wasn't crediting the ones that had really stepped up. So equally, there were some lovely people that came into my life that I knew but weren't necessarily close friends, but now I class as close friends. We did really step up. So actually I was doing them an injustice by actually not recognising that. But I think also, I mean, cancer is to blame for some of that, but I think as we get older as well, we maybe start accepting how we're treated in a different way. And so I think some people come into your life for a period of time, and whilst at the time when you're going through a cancer diagnosis that comes to an end, that's hard and hurtful, that actually perhaps they were only meant to be in your life for that period of time, and it's moving on with other people that kind of make you feel stronger, right, and make you feel good, and but likewise listen to you and you listen to them. And friendships are a two-way thing. It's not all a take, is it? And at some point some people will give more than they take, and vice versa. But if it's take and all about me and how rubbish my life is, when reality is you've broken a nail, then it's not really something I want to get involved with, to be honest.
I should have said, if anyone does have any questions, please pop them in the chat. But I think you're right, Hannah. Like, so many people that we speak to at Shine have lost friends because their friends just don't understand, or aren't interested, or maybe aren't able to cope. You never know what's going on in somebody else's life either. But I think it is a really good reminder, what you said, to focus on the people who have stepped up, because often that's the other thing people say is, oh, friends that I had, there were some friends and I didn't expect them to do so much for me, and actually they have really stepped up, and they're still here, or they're still keeping in touch, and even if it's a text or a card or something, and to appreciate the people that do stay in your life and want to do well.
I think also, upon reflection now, because it's quite a few years out, we can get stuck with thoughts, can't we, about how people should react or respond. And people don't necessarily always come back with an answer we're looking for. And I don't think it comes from a bad place, but it can really wind you up. I think at the time, I probably let some of those comments and thoughts wind me up, whereas now I just probably wouldn't talk to those individuals about some of those conversations that perhaps I need to have. And I mean, I've been told that I should be I should be grateful for being alive. And you're like, oh, really? Do you feel like that? And I understand that. I've been through a lot of treatment, and I am appreciative of being alive, but not most people get up in the morning and go, oh, I'm alive, I'm lucky. And so why do you think it's acceptable to say that to somebody that's been ill? So I think your thoughts can change a little bit, but I think we can put preconceived ideas on people as well, when we're in the crux of all the challenges that are thrown at us with a cancer diagnosis, and all the thoughts that we're kind of trying to process. We can put labels to people, can't we, that might not be true. And so I guess in perspective, sometimes we can reflect a little bit on that. But yeah, the people that don't give me anything back, I kind of like, I'm over it now. I had a bit of an epiphany moment, I think, when I got to 40 as well, which is like, honestly, if people don't want to spend time with me for who I am, then do I want to spend time with them anyway? Probably not.
There you go. That's right. And we all want to spend time with you. So there have been a couple. Somebody said, that they've had people say, "Oh, did you think about not taking chemo and using herbal stuff?" Or, and someone's just asked, "What's advice for people, or do you have advice for people who are fertile but there's a risk of getting pregnant?" Not everyone's infertile, obviously, but sometimes I think it's a real struggle, isn't it? Like after you've had cancer, to worry, to think about having a child and carrying a child. And actually, whether you're a man or a woman, it can be stressful, I think. I don't know how you make those decisions. I don't know. I guess that's probably a different situation than the one you were in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky that my oncology team at the Christie actually were able to signpost me to the relevant departments. So if I've got problems post and I ask for support, they do signpost me to the right department for that help. But if your oncology team don't do that, then I would always advocate you to go and spend some time with a fertility specialist. And they will test your fertility. And it's not just a blood test, it's about having conversations with you as well. So I wouldn't do that with you. Your GP should be able to refer you. But it needs to be done with a specialist. So every regional hospital should have some form of fertility element attached to it. I know MRI in Manchester is the one local to me, but there are those everywhere. And I think you've got to take that on board and not necessarily listen to experts that are people that are friends who've got an experience of a friend of a friend. I think it's a valuable learning in terms of their lived experience, but actually you need to go and speak to the experts that actually know properly about it. And your oncologist specializes in oncology, so you want to go to a fertility specialist that specializes in fertility, because they're two very different things, but they do normally have one that's linked, especially so if you've got a more rare cancer. I mean, I use the word fortunate, but blood cancers generally do get younger adults, so I guess they do have those links in. But if your oncologist doesn't, then maybe ask them if they've got any links via some of their other oncologies that work with young adults to see whether they can actually signpost you to the right person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in London, for example, UCLH has an onco-fertility clinic. So people who have been through cancer treatment can go. And I think that is a growing area as younger people are diagnosed more with cancer. But it's really tricky. And I think somebody's just said in the chat, I found doctors won't advise on whether to have children, as the medical risk is a personal decision. And I think it's really tough. It's hard to get good advice. I think you have to find the right doctors, and then you have to find somebody who's willing to talk you through what may or may not happen. And a lot of them don't do that, or they don't know as well. That's why you need to find the specialists, don't you?
I guess also when we're in a blame culture as well, they don't probably want to give advice in case it kind of comes back and falls upon them. And I think that's true of, if I think back to some of my chemo decisions that I had to make, should I make the option to go for a second stem cell transplant or not? Then actually those decisions fell back to me, and I might ask them in their opinion, what would you recommend? But sometimes they were very careful in not answering those questions. So yeah, it's true of everything, isn't it? But it's very difficult, because actually in reality, we want to know, actually, is it a dream or is it a reality? Or is the reality actually too much in, what's the word I'm looking for? The reality of the situation, actually in real life, can it happen? Because the reality of having a child and actually having a child can be two very different things, can't they? It's a bit like having a dog. The reality of having a dog, it's the same principle.
Everyone thinks having a dog is a great idea. So you're up at 5:30 walking it. And we're at time, so I do want to wrap up, but I just wanted to kind of ask you, the theme of the conference this year is reasons to be hopeful. And obviously you've been through a lot. And as you said, you're still living with the consequences of all of that treatment in a variety of different ways. But is there anything that you feel like you've learned along the way that does kind of keep you going or give you hope, gets you out of bed in the morning?
I can't change the situation I find myself in. No matter what I do, I can't change or take this away. So I've had to find a way to accept it. Doesn't mean I'm happy about it, but I've had to find a way of accepting it. But actually, by spending time with other people that get it, that you can have open and honest and transparent conversations with without any caveating or explaining away, actually can be really powerful. And there can be a lot of humour and camaraderie by spending time with others in a similar experience. It doesn't have to be the same cancer. And actually, we don't all sit there talking about cancery things all of the time. We have talks about all sorts of things. But actually, from that, you get understanding, don't you? But also you can learn from other people's experiences in terms of, well, somebody else has coped with it this way, or somebody else has coped with it that way. And some of those things might not be right for you, but some of them might be, or it might be elements of all the different conversations you have that work for you. But I think the biggest one for me is be kind to yourself, and forget the idiots. I think you know, idiots really, if they annoy you, or they are idiots. If they just annoy you because they're a bit annoying, then fair enough. But if they are generally causing you anxiety and angst, then actually, do you need them in your life? Because what are they bringing to you? So I keep coming back to that word happy. If it doesn't make me happy, then I have to question why. So I could really do with winning the lottery, but I suspect that's not going to happen anytime.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I'm going to win the lottery, so I'll yeah. Feel like we need to get "Forget the Idiots" on a t-shirt for you. But Hannah, thank you so much, because it's been great chatting to you, and also thank you for stepping in at the last minute. So I'm going to stop recording now. I can see, look, there's applause and everything. But yeah, thank you very much, and we'll hopefully see all of you in the next Shine Connect session. Thanks so much.